All right, we're live. Going to be talking about some old stories today. Tell some ghost stories of things I've experienced. Give everybody a moment to get here. Got a few places where I want to go ahead and share this. Looks like the sound is working all right. Okay, like I said, we're going to share it a few places more. It's easier to do that from my phone, I think. Hey! Hello, Amoeba Toast and Black Unigriffin. Awesome. Glad to see you. Hi. We're going to be talking about a river spirit that I rehabilitated, which includes the time I was on Hoarders. But that's it's a minor thing to it. I'm not really trying to brag about that. Let's see. What am I doing here? There's the post that I wanted to share to some of my groups. Okay. Not that one. Call that good. Got to give you the episode. All right. Actually, I can get a link to that. Just a moment. Still waiting for everybody to show up. Anyways, got to go to my own YouTube, and I have it in one of my playlists. Okay. Videos. Oh, playlists. Mentions. Okay, let's see the videos in there. There we are. This isn't the whole episode. I would Hey Kira, good to see you. This is part of the Hoarders episode here. I just go ahead and share screen and watch it while we talked about it, but I'm afraid that I'd get some kind of like copyright ding or something, so I'm not going to do that. But I do have it pinned for the moment. Hey Felix. Hello, my love. Yeah. So, like I said, tonight we're gonna talk about rehabilitating river spirits and some other ghost stories that have happened to me. The drink of choice for the moment is another dry Irish stout made by the same company, category 12. This is thoughtfully crafted beer for everyone. It's a little creamier, maybe. Pretty much the same beer. And then we'll have a cider for later. Okay, so that episode of Hoarders, we're going to start with that. Hello, Romstead. Indeed. Yeah, it's like I said, that one doesn't show the whole thing. If you go to A&E, you can probably find the whole thing, but that mention's got most of the bits about me. I did that actually at the request of the Wizard of Ogden, Travis Rasmussen, another admin of the guild. He had the whole thing set up and was working with it, but then some things came up and he wasn't able to show on the day that they filmed. So I went to the Hoarders episode. And as you might see in the link, I wasn't really done up for it. I wasn't the channel wasn't monetized yet. I mean, the channel existed, but it wasn't what it is now. It was mostly, it's still just a means to an end, but I wasn't very concerned with such things at the time. So I just showed up in a t-shirt and a top hat. And I showed up to work, not to not to showcase myself, essentially. Anyways, I get there, and it turns out that the woman who was hoarding was actually someone I knew from back in my street kid days, which was interesting. And she practiced magic herself even before that. That's part of the reason I remembered her was because she was one of the street kids I talked to that also was using chaos magic. Anyways, she was suffering from a very disturbing haunting, which, frankly, a lot of the times when I show up to get rid of a haunting for someone, a lot of times there's not really anything there but something they've created. I mean, ghosts are actually surprisingly common, so I can usually find a ghost there on the property somewhere. But for the most part, um, a lot of times when I show up to a haunting, what I wind up finding is essentially a tulpa. Something that all the different creaks and noises in the house have convinced the person there's a ghost. And once someone's convinced there's a ghost, well, now there is a ghost, or at least a tulpa. So a lot of times when I go to a haunted house or something like that, that's what I'm dealing with. This time, however, um, well, we'll start at the beginning. She had a traumatic brain injury, which is what was the cause of all the hoarding as well. But during this time, she was living in a trailer that had a creek flowing nearby. Now, this creek used to be a lot more than a creek, and it starts way out on the edges of the Great Salt Lake and just kind of meanders back into Ogden the way that they've set it up because they've redirected this creek many times, and that's part of the problem. Now, this creek, where it starts, is a burial ground. And I didn't understand that at the time. I mean, someone mentioned, oh, there's burial grounds in the area, and I got a sense of it, but I didn't fully understand it yet. But it's going to come up again later. So I go there, I'm doing the thing, and as you'll see on the video, I've used a Caribbean gourd trap, which is yeah, it's too bad I don't dare just share it with you and we could talk about it while I'm watching it, but I don't know. I'm afraid I get some kind of copyright ding for that. Anyways, so I go in there and I have a Caribbean gourd trap, which what that is you put a large hole in a gourd and a small hole, and you have to essentially intentionally create these holes with the intent that any kind of astral or etheric form, things in between the veil. We're gonna start using the word etheric because I like that. I like that. That works well. Any kind of etheric form that gets near that will be sucked in and then not allowed to go out the small hole. And these work great. This is I wouldn't call it voodoo, but it's definitely a Caribbean-based tradition. You see it more in the actual Caribbean work rather than the Africanization of Caribbean work, which is where you get most of your voodoo and stuff like that. They're a cross between African traditions and the different traditions in the Caribbean. This is actually something that essentially is from North America. Yes, Caribbean folk magic. There you go. That's a good word for it. I don't know which island it originates from, but I've been taught the technique and it works. It works really well. But on the episode, this thing that caught in the gourd actually burnt a hole in the gourd. I'd never seen that before. And part of the reason is because it's mostly designed for astral forms. And that gave me the first tip off that I was dealing with something that wasn't exactly a ghost or a tulpa. Now, like I said, she had a traumatic brain injury. So I very much expected to be dealing with a large form tulpa, something that had gotten in from her brain injury. But there was that creek going through the property, and there was a spirit that was in the creek, and he had gotten the idea of water flowing, and that was his whole groove. That was his whole groove. Make the water flow down the creek and keep it going. But when they built the damn trailer park, they had adjusted that creek one too many times, and his flow wasn't right anymore. And then a woman gets a traumatic brain injury, Shannon, right next to the, and then lives right next to the creek where the flow was supposed to go. And well, that created an opening. And rather than continuing to flow into the creek, he began to flow into that crack in her traumatic brain injury. And he began experiencing trauma. And eventually, he started wanting to make blood flow instead of water. So he then began influencing people there. People would have all kinds of self-ideation thoughts on that property. And if you get to watch the whole episode, there's stuff where she's written stuff in red on the walls. She did all kinds of stuff trying to appease this spirit. And she also had another spirit there that I really wanted to get a hold of, but I didn't. So I don't know what's going on there. But she had a cat skull she had called friend and was giving a lot of emotion and work to. And that probably was something really powerful. And I was really hoping to get my hands on that cat skull. But by the time I got called to the episode, they had made her essentially purify it and bury it, which was actually kind of sad. But it, had to have been a very, very well developed caw with everything that was going on. At any rate, while I'm at it, we're going to do a little side note here. She had a very interesting magical technique that I just want to bring up for a moment. This is the lady I was talking about when she had a really good day, would vacuum the whole house and suck up some of that momentum and energy of the house being in a really good vibe. And then when the house was in a bad vibe, she'd open the vacuum, the dust that she collected from the vacuum that day back up and spread it around the house to bring back the positive vibe. A little bit messy, but it's an interesting technique. I think you could find a way to do it without actually spreading the dust back out. But that's how she was doing it. Anyways, so the spirit had gotten into her and was causing a lot of ideation amongst people. And it was definitely there. I show up for the episode and I'm doing the thing. I use this thing where I've got 2 pieces of selenite that I broadcast out as an erasing energy. I've got the gourd set up. And I'm filling a few things in a few rooms. I'm blowing sweetgrass through a copper tube to purify everything after I do the selenite. And I get to that gourd that I'd set up, because the idea is that you set up the gourd and then you start moving the energies around. You start purifying room by room and pushing it towards the gourd. By the time I got to the gourd, it literally burnt through it. And that first day, I was not able to recapture this spirit. And that's kind of the funny part, is by the end of the episode, they're making me say I've caught the spirit, and I don't fully know what's going on or anything. So if you watch the whole thing, I'm like, yeah, I caught it. I haven't caught it yet at the end of the episode. They just made me say that so that they could have a end of their episode. Even the bit with the gourd, if that looks a little cheesy, it's because I found it and went, oh my God. And they weren't filming me. So they made me do it again. Like I had to act like, oh my God, a second time. Just kind of repeat what I'd said the first time and try to keep the emotion in. Luckily, I'm an okay actor, I guess. I don't know if it came off that it was, that was actually the second time I'd seen the gourd. And something struck me at one point a little bit, but that's not the interesting bits. Yeah, like I said, the A&E episode, blah, blah, blah. It happened. They really tripped out when I lit up the sweetgrass joint. They're like, oh, are we going to get high? Like, they turned the camera away from me and everything. Then they figured out it wasn't marijuana. It was just incense. Anyways, so after that, they leave. The producer had enough sense to give me some money for what I had done, because I asked about, like, am I getting paid for this? And he was like, no. And then by the end of the episode, he's like, hey, this guy's a real sorcerer. Does anybody have any questions? And then he made sure he paid me, because it's Yeah, yeah, that is pretty funny. I'm standing there with a gourd with a burning hole in it going, "Yeah, I caught it." But yeah, so the producer had enough sense to then pay me because it's not a good idea to, I wasn't gonna make a fuss and make some kind of debt thing over it, but it's never a good idea to have somebody do something of that nature, especially like a spirit removal, and not pay them in some way. I've got another story about that we could get to later about someone's ancestors protecting, literally protecting them by making sure they didn't have a debt with me. But yeah, it was a good call for them at the time. So episode ends. I don't have the spirit. I'm sitting there going, okay, now what? So I go home, and that night I astral project back to the place, and I start looking around, and that's where I confirmed it was a water spirit. Like I kind of knew that before, but I could see it connected to the water, the creek that was in that trailer park. That's all this was going on. And also, I find some irony in this that a water spirit burnt a hole in my gourd. That's kind of funny too. But yeah, funniest bit is me sitting there holding it, going, "Yeah, I caught it." Gourd's still practically smoking, but that's what they made me say. So I told them that I caught it, and then I went home, astral projected, and managed to kind of connect with it. Yeah, I suppose so. Definitely very angry water. Water that was now more interested in making blood flow than water. So I astral project the next night. I connect to it. And this is one of the moments where essentially bluffing can be very useful. It's a lot of times with the spirits like that, it's not as important to be able to harm them as it is to convince them that you can. So while I was astral projecting, I did manage to make myself look very big and puffy and appear in several places at once within the trailer park while it was looking. And I essentially told it, if when I come back, if you don't get in this gourd and stay in there, I'm going to chase you down and tear you apart. And it believed me. Honestly, I don't think I could have. Not all of it. It would have been but it believed me. That being the important bit. So the next day I come again, and Travis is with me this time. He's been able to come with me, and I have him clear out the house some more while I am looking outside of the house, like in the creek, trying to figure this thing out. And it just came to me and got in the gourd, and I severed its connection to the house. I asked it its name, and it said it wanted to be called Ronaldo. But I got an image of like maybe an old Ronaldo car had been in the creek at one point, or an emblem from a Ronaldo, because I saw the image of a Ronaldo, like, or a Renault. Sorry, they're actually called Renault. The really old type of car. I think it had been around a Renault and somehow knew the word, so it thought of that as a name, and it asked to be called Ronaldo. Because before that, it didn't seem to have had a name. At any rate, I brought the spirit home because that gets it out of there, and I can't leave it there where it's, you know, causing ideation to people. I can't just leave this thing there to make blood flow instead of water. It has to go. So I take it home and I put it in my servitor tank. And I did have a servitor tank at that point, and then but I have it in there and it's learning to flow. And the idea was to get it used to the idea of water again. And I wasn't sure what to do. This whole process of rehabilitating this water elemental wound up taking years. And there are several fascinating stories that take place. So at first I have it in the servitor tank, and it's doing okay there. I had a few interesting dreams, but not a lot happened. I just had dreams about it flowing, and I would have dreams with it where we would take blood and slowly change it back to water and get back to the idea of flowing water. And this went on for a while. And then I tried to release it because I thought I was done. I thought we were done. I tried to release it at the local pond, and it almost immediately came back. And then I actually, my servitor, I don't remember why I discontinued my servitor tank. For some reason, I dried up the servitor tanks. Oh, I had gone out to Chihuahua and was there for a while, and was wound up having to stay out there for a while. So I wound up letting the servitor tanks dry up, and then when I came back, I didn't have the servitor tanks, and I was staying in a different room. I'm missing part of the sequence of events there. Okay, no, that's when I first tried to take it back. Was something is wrong with my sequence of events here. Anyways, I wound up in the upstairs room a while later, and I didn't have the servitor tanks anymore. I thought that I had hopefully gotten it into Steed's Pond. That's what happened. I had the servitor tanks dried up, and then I wound up back there, and every night I find this wet spot in the middle of the carpet because I was staying in the upstairs room and there's carpet up there, and I find this wet spot. And for 4 nights in a row, I blamed my dog. And she got in trouble. I yelled at her, but it didn't smell like urine. It didn't smell like dog urine. But I have to assume it's the dog, because what else could have caused this? And so the poor dog got in trouble 4 nights in a row. And then the 5th night, I was like, "That's it, Cootie. You can't even sleep in here." So I locked her in the hallway, spent the night, woke up in the morning, and there's still a wet spot in the middle of the carpet in the exact same spot. And that's when I realized I needed to restart the servitor tanks to give it somewhere to be, because it had gotten kicked out of Steed's Pond, which is a pond by my house. And essentially, there was already a spirit there. And so I took it back. We started up the servitor tanks, had everything going again. Started having those dreams. And at this point, I kind of thought the thing was going to have to live with me forever. So I went ahead and connected it to my servitors, and even connected it to the servitor sigil, the squiggle one, kind of like the chorus there, but without the triangle behind it. You've seen my minion or servitor sigil before, most of you. Anyways. Okay. So then I wind up back out in Tooele. And of course, I've had Boris for a long time by this point, but Boris hasn't seen the servitor sigil in a while because I don't know. Anyways, I get that's an unimportant part of the story. I wound up back out in Tooele, which is a little podunk town out in the middle of the West Desert in Utah. But when I was doing small engine repair, that's where I actually worked. So sometimes I wound up having to stay out there. So I'm staying out there because there's a lot of work. I'm living out there. And I have a tank, a very small tank that I'm operating my servitor through and the elemental. And I decided I would try again. That I would take it and let it loose in this pure stream up in the mountains up there. They're called the Ochre Mountains. They're just outside of Tooele out in the West Desert. I could stop coughing. I'm sorry. Okay. Let's try another sip of this beer, see if that'll slow it down. Okay. So, anyways, and this is the strangest one. This is the strangest one of the whole lot. And one that I had several witnesses for. I wish I took in some pictures of this. Anyways, so I take and I release the elemental into the creek. And I go home. Spend the night, nothing's going on. Go to work the next day. Come home, and there is a bloody handprint on the back window about that big. like just a small little handprint. And there is like some broken glass back there, but it's safety glass. You could like force your hand up against that broken glass and run it, and you'd really have to work at it to cut yourself. But there's a small handprint, and it's like bloody water, and it's dripping down from there, and then it goes into the house, which was locked, by the way, and up by the sink, and then out to the trailer where I was staying at. Or no, actually, it didn't make it to the trailer. It was over. It was up around the sink and in the kitchen, and it was just this bloody water. Very bizarre. And sometimes I can communicate with Boris, and Boris's skull was there, like his actual vessel. What I was keeping it there at the time. So I commune with Boris, and I get this image of this undead elemental thing that it saw as dangerous coming into the house. It's like, so I rammed it because Boris, if you are actually near the spirit, is also very protective. You know, he can be used as a protection sigil. The sigil itself, the cash cow sigil, can be used as protection, but there's also an extra layer to that if you've got Boris physically with you. You know, he's a guardian. He will protect the area, keep things stable. He's like, this thing was crazy. So I started bashing it and I mashed it away. And then as this is going on and I'm seeing the visions, I realize that's Ronaldo. So I go out and I get things set up again and I manage to recapture him. And now he's been damaged. He's pretty hurt at this point because Boris is not, well, Boris is no slouch. A massive bull caw, you know. He was a big boy when he was alive. Yeah, it was this we're like 4 years into it or something at this point by the time that happened. And yeah, Boris messed him up pretty bad. So now he's back. In some ways, I think that might have helped because there was still a lot of blood in that water, but it had gotten kicked out of it had gotten kicked out of that creek like almost immediately. Wound up right back at the house. My uncle saw all of this, freaked right out. He's always kind of believed me, but he certainly stopped doubting me after that. We also would get gremlins because we were small engine repair. We would get gremlins in the machines we were working on sometimes. There's one time we were working on a four-wheeler, an ATV, and the carburetor, you got a little needle in the carburetor that keeps it regulates the gas flow. Like as it lifts up, it lets gas in, and as it goes down, it keeps the gas out. It's part of the carburetor, and it regulates gas flow. And it's in its own little chamber outside of the actual well on the state ATV is there's an actual chamber with the pin in it, and then there's the carb bowl. And we got the whole machine working. We had the machine working, drove it down the road, had it going, getting ready to parked it, was getting ready to call the customer and be like, all right, this thing is done. But we went out and started it one more time because you gotta check things. We go out there and we start it one more time and it will not start, it just keeps flooding. We're like, what in the hell? And so we take it back apart, and that needle, damn gremlin had somehow gotten in there, taken that needle, and moved it all the way. It was sitting in the bottom of the bowl. There's no way the machine could have run at all with that being there. There's no way it could get there from where it was without someone opening up the carburetor, unless there's a little gremlin in there, grabbed it, and drug it around. I'm a strong believer in gremlins, especially when it comes to ATVs. And so the answer, there was the guy had this little brass bell. I get out there and just ring like mad, ding, 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 and tell, get the hell out of here, you little bastards. And it works, chases them off, at least temporarily. So we had to fix the machine twice because of the damn gremlins. But anyways, I'm off subject. Well, it's the subject of the night, essentially. But I'm off of the main story that I was going to tell about. Yeah. So, I think Boris beating the hell out of him at that point actually helped in the end because there was a lot of stuff in him that was still from flowing around inside of that woman's mind. Um, oh, update on the house if you want to know about that part. She did say she felt safer in the house and stuff after that, but she actually wound up selling the trailer. She said there was just too many other things that had happened, just too many bad memories, and even though, yes, she did feel the ghost of God, she didn't wanna live there anymore. So they wound up selling the trailer, and I haven't heard from her since. I don't know where she is beyond that, but she did wind up selling the trailer. Okay, so Boris beat the hell out of him. I kept him there, and he was very small and weak for a long time, but then we wound up back in Clearfield. I got to where I could get back to where I was doing okay enough that I didn't have to stay there where I worked because I don't like living in Tooele. I'd much of the two, I'd rather live in Clearfield. So I got back into Clearfield. I had my setup going on. We had him going really well. And this is when I was completely convinced, all right, this guy, I'm stuck with him. Which he's a cool spirit. I have nothing against Ronaldo, but I was like, okay, if I let him go anywhere I try to put him, the spirits chase him out. You know, Boris is back to where he's not going to be attacking him. He's connected to the servitor tanks, and my servitor itself learned a lot about how to flow. And I mean, this was a symbiotic process. I It was very useful to me to do all of this. This wasn't just altruism, you know. And at this point, I thought, okay, well, this thing's gonna have to be my familiar and start working for me, and it's stuck here. So I actually made a necklace with its sigil with and connected it to the servitor, connected Ronaldo to the servitor sigil, and started wearing it on a necklace around my neck. Okay, so this goes on for a while, like probably another year and a half, where the Ronaldo is just circling back and forth in my servitor tanks, helping them grow. And if you look at my channel back then, I had servitor tanks, all bunches of them, all over my warren that I had going on there. Bunch of different tanks with different stuff going on, and he was connected in all of them and helping to flow the servitor tanks. And he got real used to water. He got real used to being in the right place. Now, at the same time, unbeknownst to me, the creek that near Willard Bay, which is a bay on the edge of the Great Salt Lake that I was hunting at, I did know that I was technically hunting in a burial ground for the Utes. I was aware of this. And there's a crossroads there where I would always leave gifts. And I have a few interesting stories there. Like one time when I was duck hunting, because I'd left a particularly good gift, I got out there and all the ducks were just going in a circle. And if I'd been willing to just cheat like that, I could have just started shooting them. It was like something it's like the spirits are like, all right, yeah, you give us a good offering, man. Here we're gonna make sure you get a duck. But and that's unsporting. And yes, I do eat the animals. I'm not just there for fun and sport. It is something that is a communing for me. It's one of the times where I am fully interacting with the pattern of life. But anyways, that's we're not here to I'm not here to justify myself on that. But the point is they were doing that and I definitely could have had one like basically cheating, but I didn't. I spooked them and we did a thing. But anyways, so this goes on for a while and I've got that necklace. But unbeknownst to me, that creek that I am hunting is the same creek that Ronaldo was originally connected to. And so one day when I'm going out there, I realize I don't have anything to leave for the at the crossroads there. And I think gave him a little song. I did something, but I went ahead and went hunting anyways. And when I'm walking back through the crossroads, I kind of felt something move around my chest. But I get back to the car and the necklace was gone. The necklace that Ronaldo was connected to is gone. And I go walking back out along the whole thing because there's a trail that I could walk along. And I went looked at the crossroads and it wasn't there anymore. But like I said, I felt something move just then. I'm pretty sure that They took Ronaldo. They took him home because I still feel like if I concentrate really hard, I can still kind of connect to Ronaldo, but he's not there anymore. He's not in my servitor tanks. He's home. He went back. He finally got back to where he belonged. So that's the story of Ronaldo and how I rehabbed him. Like I said, it gave my own servitor tanks a lesson in cohesion. They were able to learn a lot of things by working with him. So it was a very valuable lesson to me. And it took a long time. It took a long time. And I don't know if it ever would have worked out if Boris hadn't basically beaten him down to nothing, to where there was hardly anything left, and all the blood was essentially out of him and put all over my uncle's kitchen and on the sliding glass door in the back of the house and the sidewalk and everywhere. Yes. Yes, I didn't realize it at the time, but I've even gone and checked on Google Maps just to make sure I am correct. And that creek connects to the creek that flows down 12th Street, which is where the trailer park was, where he had gotten in. Now he's not the ghost of someone from there. He really was just a water elemental that was all about flow, 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 flow down the creek, flow down the creek, and that's why his name was Ronaldo and not, you know, some name. He wasn't. This wasn't a ghost. This was an elemental connected to the creek itself, and probably part of how it had gotten awakened to the degree that it was flowing through there. But even through there, it's been changed so many times. Like there's a dam there for Willard Bay. They've changed so much. The area's been raided. Like it's actually kind of a travesty what has happened there. But maybe now Ronaldo can protect the area a little better. Okay, so um, let's see what else would I have to say about Ronaldo. I figured we talk about some other ghost stories as well, other things that have happened to me over the years, which I'm suddenly drawing a bit of a blank on. Um, let's see. One of my favorites is um what would I call him? The Lookout. The Lookout was a ghost that I had just before I moved just before I went on one of my walkabouts. I was living in Ogden in a place where, well, I wasn't in the best of circumstances. I wouldn't have choose to live with the people I was living with had I had a choice. But life is what life is sometimes. At any rate, we were living in the bad part of Ogden, this little basement apartment. And every time a cop drove by, I'd hear this little shh, shh. I was like, what is that? And after a while, um, I began to really notice this pattern that anytime I saw a cop, there is that little shh, shh. And I talk about this actually in the Sorcerer's Shadow Volume 2 when I'm talking about ghosts. But one of the things that I think I forget to mention in the book is that how I activated, how I got it stronger wasn't just paying attention. I had some of the yeast minions, which you'll see me talk about in some of my earlier episodes. I talk about the yeast minions. I had a little vial of them, and they are essentially connected to the servitor as well. So the same thing that Ronaldo was being rehabilitated by, these minions and servitors, is in this bottle. But when I had the bottle, what I did was I made them, They can take instructions of any kind. These aren't servitors with particular purpose. So when I heard this scratching and started figuring out there was a pattern there, I started paying more attention, and I didn't really get the right spot because I didn't know what I was dealing with. I took and I poured a bunch of those yeast minions from a vial around the edge of the door and over by the window where the scratching was, trying to just allow whatever was happening to grow. And it did. And after a while, it got to be where any time there was a cop come anywhere near our house, you're like, and especially because there was a red light right there. Man, if a cop parked there, it'd be like, things freaking out. And after I'd gotten it big and strong enough to be able to like see an image, see what was going on there, it turns out what it was there was, oh, the place used to be some kind of drug den. I never did get that much ascertained as to what kind of drug den it was, but the um the guy, yeah, this guy was the person that was watching. So his deal was he was given drugs for free essentially, as long as he kept an eye out. He was the lookout. And whenever there was cops coming, he was supposed to let everybody know, "Hey, hey, be cool. There's something going on. I'm watching everything." And I guess he'd hit the window because that's where he'd scratch was on the window. I don't never saw a direct image of that. I just know that he was the lookout, and he was supposed to let anybody look out, let anybody know when there were cops around. So he continued to do that. He must have maybe overdosed there one day, or somehow he died while he was looking out to make sure that the cops weren't coming. And then after he died, he just kept looking out. And so, yeah, that was that story essentially. It was important, I felt, in that case, to let it grow and develop. Like I talk about in the book, um, things like that. If there is too much surprise, if there is too much doubt pushed at it, it can break it until it gets strong. You got to let it get momentum behind it before you can allow people who are doubting to be part of the process. Like, if you think your house is haunted and you want it to continue being haunted, you don't immediately go point it out to the first person that's going to go, "Oh, no, that's not a thing." You want to foster it. You want to pay attention, allow it to form, do things like I did with the servitor minions, and give it offerings, give it belief and energy. Now, you are, however, at that point in danger of unconsciously creating a tulpa. And like I said, a lot of times when I go to get rid of a ghost for somebody, that's all I wind up encountering. There's always something. As long as the person actually believes there's something. I've showed up at a house before where the people wanted, were messing with me and were telling me stuff that was going on when there wasn't anything going on, and they just, I guess, wanted to see if I would be like, "Oh yeah, there's a da 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 da." They were pretty surprised when I told them their house wasn't haunted, and they argued with me, but I knew that they knew, you know. Sometimes it's not that hard to read people. And then plenty of other times, people have been completely convinced there was something, and the only thing there was their belief in a ghost being there. But you can't just tell that person, "Oh no, there's no ghost," because it's not going to help them. You can tell them it's a tulpa, and some of them will accept that. Some of them have to get other phrasing, but I don't like to lie. So it's important that I tell them the truth, while not telling them that I don't believe them. Because if I don't believe them, I'm not going to fix the problem. Yeah. And in those cases, the biggest way of getting rid of the tulpa is convincing the person that believed it was there that it was gone. And that's very much what I expected the Hoarders episode to be, honestly. Especially when I heard the woman had a traumatic brain injury. I expected it to be a fairly advanced tulpa, but I expected a tulpa. I expected something that was, you know, a product of her traumatic brain injury. And in some ways it was. It's just in that case, there happened to be an elemental that got sucked into the whole thing. And it became a whole process. Took me years, as we've discussed, before I managed to get that back under control. Anyways, I have an odd through when energy goes sour in an apartment complex and bring out the nasty types of spirits. What do I do other than ward, protect, and entity work? Huh. In a whole apartment complex. I mean, I've seen some pretty nasty things in some really old apartment complexes. Stuff can, you get the collective conscious of all the different people. And sometimes that'll form into different stuff. That's actually a story we'll tell about in a minute. Not in an apartment complex, but my high school. That's a really good one. Um, well, it depends on how much access you have to the apartment. If you're just living in the apartment, the first thing you're going to want to do is declare your space as your space, a clear area. If you've done a personal sigil, that's the best way to go about this. Is mark your personal sigil somewhere, even if it's just like, 'cause if you're renting, you can't just go painting stuff on the walls. I'm sure, but even if it's just invisible ink, yeah, I assumed. So what you're going to want to do, like I said, is if you have your personal sigil, you're going to want to spread your presence throughout your entire apartment and name that as your space and state that other spirits are not allowed in this place. As far as getting it out of the rest of the apartment, that is going to be a thing. That is going to be a long time working. There's going to be all kinds of stuff, but you want to get it out of your space. And then from there, you want to clear the ways of how you get in and out of the building, which can be done by using your personal sigil and then projecting tier, the rune that looks like an arrow, forward down the paths that you take, or you can use Akum. You can look up Akum in my, that's another one on my playlist. It is it's typically used as a road opener spell, but he also creates the way. So you could create the way with that, and then again, personal sigil, pushing your presence into those spaces to get yourself in and out of the apartment without with things not being allowed to affect you. Hmm. Yes, this is very good advice, Black Unigriffin. Polarize a red brick, pulverize a red brick, then use it to in water to wash the floor and walls. This is very good advice as well. Floor washes like that are a very good idea. The brick is going to stabilize it. You might want to do Florida water first, like wash the house with Florida water, essentially as a primer to cleanse the area, and then do the brick dust water after that to strengthen the space and make a more cohesive barrier from the inside and the outside. Yeah, Florida water is quite potent stuff. It's essentially just citrus water. So if you can't get Florida water, I don't know where you are in the world. I assume the states, just because well, most people who watch my channel are, and not every it's not easy to get Florida water in every state. You can get real Florida water at a Botanica or somewhere like that, or I guess order it on Amazon these days. Probably be just fine. Um, but if you can't get it, lemon water with a little bit of like, well, really, it's just the lemon water. Yeah, yeah, fair enough. You picked up spell oil for making stuff, so I, yeah, all right. Yeah, I mean, if you're feeling like you need to just go, just go. I mean, there's no reason for you to defend the whole apartment complex if it's not somewhere you feel that attached to. Especially like if it's an apartment complex and things are starting to get a real cohesive haunting going on, it might be a constant battle to keep the shit out of your apartment. It's like just like if a place has roaches, you can keep roaches out of your apartment even if if the complex has roaches, but it's a constant battle. Yeah, just lost your heart for the place. Fair enough. Oh, so that's the next ghost story I was going to tell, since I guess that's the theme of the night is different ghost stories. This one I is another one that I have talked about in my books. This is in a Sorcerer Shadow Volume 1. Jerry, I've been reading Jerry Allen Johnston's book on dealing with spirits, but it's way too detailed. Um Honestly, I haven't read that book. Spirit dealing can get very complex. That's just complex as dealing with a person, with people, or even more so. But anyways, um my high school, like the apartment thing reminded me of, like I said, that idea of the collective conscious of a particular group of people can start creating beings, a shared tulpa, which is one of the things that can get into like apartment buildings, or even just themes and momentum can go so deep into a place that it has a permanent vibe. But anyways, what an example of where I saw this created was at my high school, and I was totally at fault for most of this. So, yeah, this is another story of crazy art doing being chaotic, I guess. So, um, I had just come across the concept of the law of perceptions, belief imparts reality. And even though I had learned this lesson from special sources, I still wanted to know if it was real. Just, well, especially if you get something from, I mean, what would essentially be considered personal gnosis. You got to test it. You got to learn, like, because the four laws that I talk about with sorcery, um, those all come from the audience, the horde. This is it's part of a thing they call the litany, which is like poetic remembrance of reality. Anyways, within the litany, one of the things that's discussed is the four laws of sorcery. One of them being the law of perceptions. Belief imparts reality. So I wanted to test this, and I was let's see, I was a junior in high school. I was like 16, and there was this almost forgotten legend at the school of someone supposedly hanging themselves. Ooh, freaking YouTube. Anyways, yeah, from from the sixth spotlight, and there's actually a dent underneath the chair of something landing on the chair right underneath the sixth spotlight. But this is Clearfield. I have my family. My uncles were going to high school at the time this supposedly happened. They would have remembered that. I went and I talked to teachers who were there at the time. It wasn't real. None of the teachers knew about it. I went into the school and looked, or excuse me, I went to the library and looked through the microfiche for the years around when it was supposedly happened. It's not real. Nobody unalived themselves from the sixth spotlight and fell down into that chair. That's important. That was part of what, yes, very creepy story. Supposedly, like, the story was that he was on the, he's one of the theater kids, and he had this girlfriend. They'd been boyfriend and girlfriend since junior high. They were planning to get married. He was really into her, and then she broke up with him. But then while she was doing a play up there on the stage, like, there was something going on. I don't remember exactly what, but she was in the thing. He was one of the spotlight people. And when he shone the spotlight on her, showed the spotlight on her, put himself in a thing, and then jumped down on the thing and hung himself. Very dramatic story. Very dramatic. Never happened. Not true. Okay. So now I have what I need. I have a legend of a story that didn't happen. And like hardly anybody talked about it. Like, it was just, I'd heard it once or twice. My mom had heard the story when she was there, but she's like, "Yeah, it didn't really happen." My psychology teacher, like I said, I talked to a few teachers. My psychology teacher said that it was made up by the drama students, and they went around and told people about it clear back then and got people worked up, but it never happened. Okay, so then I figure out how to break into the auditorium during lunch, and I start giving ghost tours in the auditorium and telling people this story about six, knowing it's not true. Yes, typical drama students being dramatic, indeed. So then I start telling the story, like I said, knowing it's not true. Um, and give people tours through the auditorium, and it ends in a cold spot underneath the sixth spotlight. Yeah. And the first time I didn't feel it, but all the kids, man, I lead them around the auditorium, telling them this whole story and telling them the whole thing. And we get to the thing. I'm like, and if you put your hand out here, you'll feel a cold spot. And they all felt it the first time. But what was weird was about the third or fourth time, probably a little bit the second time even, I started feeling the cold spot, which that's pretty weird, but it belief imparts reality. I know it's not real, but all these other people believe in it, starting to make a bit of a cold spot there. By the fourth or fifth time, it was cold. It was cold above that chair. I felt it just like anybody else. Now, another important bit of this is I had a few friends that were in on it. They knew that it wasn't true. We had talked about it, but they started taking it very seriously. They started feeling the cold spot in the beginning. People started seeing like figures running here and there. I started seeing things. Now, an interesting aspect to this was there wasn't just six, which is the one that we were telling people about. There was this other darker presence. And I feel like it was made up of the teenage angst of the school. Jerry, what he means by dealing, it's a sort of complicated as it pertains to defense. I've been watching psychiatrists are now spiritualists because of their investigations as well as experiences. Probably the most accurate and reliable because of what he said was very similar to what I experienced and saw with my mind's eye. Yeah, we can definitely get into spiritual combat and spiritual defense. I thought I was going to get into that in this during this story. I thought I was going to get an experience of that because that other thing, I I still have theories about what it was, but it was just kind of there. It hadn't really formed yet, and that's part of why I started thinking I have to stop this. But anyways, I'm starting to see the things myself. Some of my friends that were in on it are freaking out, believing in the thing because they see stuff. And the day that finally blew it for me, I was like, that's it. I got to get rid of this thing. I go into the auditorium, getting ready to set up a trick. We have this styrofoam head. We're gonna stick it way up in this like window that you have to climb up to. We're gonna put it up there. And I'm hoping it's gonna cast a shadow somewhere so I can mess with people that way and really add an extra element. See how much I can make this thing real. When we look up at the window, I point to the window and said, we're going to put the head there. And there's a freaking head there. Just like I described Six. Freaking got blonde hair, blue eyes. It's Six. I mean, he wasn't really there, but I saw him. Everyone who was standing there at that moment, at least at one point, had been told the story wasn't true. Some of them essentially believed it at that point. And yeah, then I'm like, okay, that's the end of this. So I got rid of it by simply telling everyone I banished it. I was like, all right, that was enough. I banished it. I sent it away. With Kaufman, I even made up this story about me going there astrally. I hate to use people's names, but one of the people who very much goddamn well knew it wasn't real, I had to tell him that I went there astrally and defeated it before they would finally give it up. And then it just kind of faded away. I mean, I think a lot of it had to do with susceptible teenagers. We were all like 15, 16 years old. But you can definitely get people to see things. I mean, I've done ghost tours as an adult. I was doing ghost tours not that long ago. And you can work people up. You get people worked up, especially if they want to be worked up. If they want to be, if they're going to participate in the story, that's how tulpas are created. The difference between a tulpa and a convincing ghost story is the willingness of the participants or shared tulpa. This is why my great grandfather used stage magic in actual rituals because he had an audience that he's performing to. He has people that are seeing it. And in order to carry out that, in order to get that going, you have to get people to stop believing in the consensus reality. You have to get them onto a new path. You have to get them to where they're thinking that the impossible is possible. You have to open them up. And so he used stage magic to do that. I don't use stage magic. For one, until about oh wow, it's been like 10 years, a little more. Before I got really aligned with myself, my fine hand-eye coordination wouldn't allow for me to do any kind of sleight of hand. I'm much better now. We're aligned. I managed to connect myself with my fuller self, and that really improved my fine hand-eye coordination. You still see it in my typing that it's not perfect, and my handwriting, but most of you probably won't ever see my handwriting. But I can draw now. I can draw. I could probably do sleight of hand if I wanted to. I do know how illusions work, like large scale illusions and stuff, and I could do some of that stuff, but I don't because I feel like there is more depth in a lack of trickery. Yeah. I mean, I did back then, obviously, like during that whole Legend of Six, but I had a reason. I had an experiment that I was performing. And so, point of that story, other than that we're telling the ghost stories, is that it confirms the belief in parts reality. The experiment was a success. And I suppose for proper scientific method, I'd have to do the experiment several times. But I mean, how am I going to get the perfect setup that many times? Like, I did do ghost stories for a while there, but the trouble with the ghost stories is I don't know what things did and didn't have something real behind them. There are times where I had people on the tour feeling or sensing stuff that I wasn't picking anything up. You know, it's a good chance they were just getting um, the vibe from me telling the story and getting into it well enough that they started to, feel stuff. But then there are a few times on them ghost tours, like there's one time something walked up and tapped on my head and my shoulder. It felt like a bird landed on me. Nothing there. But there's no birds in any of the stories that I told. Excuse me. There were a few things, that happened on the ghost tours that I can't really explain. Mostly the one in Seattle, though. The one in Utah, few things happened. There was definitely people a few times were like, this or that. But I don't know how many of those were, you know, actual ghosts, or how compared to how many were me doing my thing and getting them into such a vibe that they began to feel stuff. Because you can definitely persuade people into believing things hard enough that they see them. But that's magic too in its way. But I don't believe in using any sleight of hand or physical material illusions without informing people beforehand that it's going to happen. Because if they see through it, it damages things. Like, if I'm doing a ritual and there's going to be some kind of special effects of that nature, you might forget when I do it that I've told you that I'm going to be doing special effects, but I'll have told you beforehand. Oh no, you're good. I just don't know a lot about the cacao demons, so that's not. I haven't had much to say on it. I've been reading what you said, and it's actually some of it is quite interesting, especially the idea of pollution and relating to the Ronaldo, the water elemental that I was talking about. Like, you know, like I say, I haven't responded much to what you said, but I've been reading what you typed, and it's quite interesting stuff. So don't apologize. You're good. I just haven't had much to contribute to it. Anyways, um, where were we? On to our second drink of the night. Just a Lone Tree dry cider. I do rather enjoy a nice dry cider. Stouts and dry ciders. Is that like cacao, like the plant cacao? Or are you saying caca? Caca demons. Anyways, um some other stories. There's actually one that's rather sad. My, I mentioned Boris earlier, cough spirits, and this story has a has a bit of a moral to it, actually, about how one should treat other beings that are non-human. Okay, so when my brother was a kid, um, No, I didn't make it for him originally. I decided to give it to him. So my brother is like 5 years old. I'm 10 years older than my brother, by the way. So I was 10. I found a coyote skull. Or no, if he was 5, I was 15. Sorry. That makes a lot more sense. Anyways, yeah, so he was 5, I would have been 15, which makes me think he must have been like 4 and I was 14. Yeah, yeah, that's about right. Either way, when we were young, I found a coyote skull. And this is one of the first spirits that I ever fully made a call from was that coyote skull. This is one of the ones where like I had been told this information, but not just by someone telling me. There was also I have people in my head. Some of them, I have a little bit of a plurality thing going on with my own consciousness, but also I don't know how else to put it, but my ancestors, my grandfathers, like my great grandfather, like I said before, dude died before I was born. Doesn't mean I've never met him. And then there's his grandfather and his grandfather and his grandfather, etc., etc. They they're all there sometimes, especially when I was younger. Like when I was, you know, in the single digits and up to like a little bit before puberty and during puberty, man, they were dancing around in my head all the goddamn time. Anyways, I was told this, but then also I was told by them many times when I found the coyote skull. For some reason, it was perfect. And when I got it, they were like, "Okay, grab this, blow into it, make it alive, picture it growing its flesh back, picture its veins coming in, picture its fur, picture blow into the skull and picture it." So I do what I'm told, by the dudes in my head, and I blow into the skull, and it works. It works very well. Fair enough. Evil spirit. Okay, so yeah, so I make this caw and I awaken it. But then almost immediately, I decide it's not for me, it's for my brother. I don't remember how I came to that conclusion exactly, but I gave it to my brother. And it became essentially his imaginary friend. On the entirely imaginary isn't the word, especially in this case, but it became his Hobbs. He's hanging out with his coyote spirit that I gave him. He kept it on the shelf and like it was his good friend. And this went on for years. And then high school comes along. So I guess it was only like, well, let's see, I try not to use people's names. But anyways, yeah, I was 18 when I met the people. So went on for about 3, 4 years. And finally I meet some friends in high school that actually can do stuff, like actually other interesting people finally. A few, which was surprising for Utah in general, honestly. Because a lot of the people I knew before that, there were ones that certainly thought they knew stuff. But anyways, so I have friends that can do stuff and can sense things, and I bring them home, and they're down in my room, and I go and I leave and I use the bathroom, and I come back, and my friend's like, "Hey, I just caught this undead spirit outside your window, and I brought it in, and I killed it because it was dangerous. And about the time he says that, my brother comes running down the stairs. Who killed my coyote? And yeah, that's why you don't attack people's things. Like, it was pretty sad, you know? My poor little brother, he's like, "Who killed my coyote?" Like, just a little bit later. Like, he's saying it, and here my brother's screaming, and Jay's like, "Oh my god, what have I done?" But it's too late. You know, once something like that's been bashed, like, he did a pretty thorough job. I couldn't bring it back. But that's why you shouldn't just grab any, if you've learned the way to fight such things. And like, so we can talk a little bit about spiritual combat tonight. But if you've learned how to do that, that doesn't mean just go attack every ghost you see. You know, um, I talk about that in the part about banishment in volume 2, which is the only part I haven't done many videos on at this point because timing of talking about that with my mom passing. Anyways, don't want to get into that. Um, Other than to say, I do talk about um a little bit about what types of spirits. Like, it's not always our business to go around banishing stuff, you know? Some stuff belongs where it is. Just because something's a ghost, even, doesn't mean it needs to be displaced. It needs to be pushed out. It needs to be stopped. This is part of what makes the world interesting, is having all these hauntings and ghosts. A lot of times if people ask me when I do go to exercise a ghost, if there really is a ghost there, or even if sometimes if it's just a tulpa, I often offer to find a way to get you people to be able to cooperate and get along. Dragon's blood can be very powerful that way. It's true. That's the same reason I'm very careful with broadcasting selenite, is because it's like an astral eraser. Like, if you take a piece of selenite, put your energy into it, and then broadcast it out, it's like bellfire. Just it just will tear right through stuff. So you got to be careful with it, because you can rip up your own spell work just by bringing a piece of selenite through there, especially if you have a copper uh, wire is the easiest thing. Connected the two pieces of selenite, like I actually have in the calls them maras. I'm only assuming that we roll that R. Yeah, mostly dragon's blood I see as a I mean, it does purify in a way, but it invigorates. It invigorates yourself. It is something that, yeah, Alpaza Andean tradition. I had a feeling there was something South American going on with what you were talking about, which is why I rolled the R. I mean, I like dragon's blood, honestly. Yeah. Um, I find it a very invigorating. It is definitely has a purification aspect to it, and if you're using it, it can definitely, by boosting the self, push other things out. It's definitely a matter of preference, though. Whatever resonates with you and whatever it does with your spell work. Felix enjoys the dragon's blood as well. They haven't said anything about it, but they've certainly burned a lot of it. Um, I like it as the incense, like how Felix does it, but that was one of my favorite ones to put on an incense burner, like with the charcoal, which I need to get going again here. That's something that I'm actually um, slacking on. Oh, I have new condensing chambers. Just a moment. I want to grab one of those. What is this? Tied to something here. Okay. Oh, they're filthy. One of my most popular videos on YouTube is for a demonstration on servitor sending. And this is the kind of chamber that I use for that. And the charcoal incense. With charcoal incense in here with a sigil of the servitor. Wait a minute, something's not right there. No, no, you put the servitor sigil on top. Like that's gonna light on fire if you put a piece of paper under the charcoal. It's been a while. So we put the charcoal here, sitting on something that's non-flammable, of course, and you put that on top, and then you put the sigil, or you put this on top of that, and then you put the sigil on top with just enough space to allow it to sit in there, and the smoke condenses, and you form the servitor inside there by mentally imagining the form of the servitor as the sigil with the sigil on top to control the how it forms. In the end, you go to send the servitor. It's easier to demonstrate than describe. But anyways, I finally have one again. That's kind of fun. I'm doing a video on that in the near future. Frankincense is one of the oldest of incense. Interestingly, I believe they're both. Oh, never mind. I don't know if frankincense is actually tree sap. I realized I was just kind of talking out of my ass there, and I'd rather not. Indeed, I mean there are certainly. I have never experienced demons with those particular names. Oh, so it is a kind of sap resin. Yeah, I thought so. I was just I didn't want to say confidently, "Oh yeah, they're a sap resin, just like dragon's blood incense," and then be wrong, because my brain has a lot of facts in there, and it does. They don't always come with reference points, and that one didn't have any reference points. Like, how do I know that? And there was nothing there. So yeah, okay. So let's see, where were we? What was the last thing we talked about? I've been telling mostly about different ghost stories. I talked about doing the ghost tours for a while. That was a lot of fun doing the ghost tours. When I was doing it in Seattle, there were a few incidences that were certainly interesting. One of them was there's this alley, it's a bubble gum alley or something like that. The other bit that goes on there where people stick their gum on the walls of the alley. I don't know. I don't know. Gum all over the walls. It was interesting. And they have this tradition as to why they do it, whatever. But there's also a ghost in that alley that supposedly likes to play the piano. And on three separate occasions, while I was telling the story, just as I got to that bit, a piano started playing. Now, could be coincidence. I don't believe in coincidence. Could have been something that just happened to coincide. But three times, I don't know. I wouldn't put it past though that someone was listening at the window and ran over and played the piano real quick while we were doing it. I don't know. I can never verify what was going on there. And then another time I was telling a story about one of the buildings, and there's a little redheaded girl that is a ghost there. And as I'm telling the story and I described the redheaded girl, one of the people on the tour just screamed because they claimed they saw a redheaded girl coming up the steps just as I was describing her. Now, That very much honestly sounds to me like one of them moments where I've just gotten into someone's head well enough that they were starting to see something, because it's literally right as I'm describing it. But sometimes ghosts are funny that way. And even ghosts need to be able to ride on that belief some to be able to get you to see them. The belief imparts reality, whether the belief is true or false. Okay, so let's see. It's been an hour and a half. I've got quite a bit of beer left here. We'll probably keep going for a bit. Okay. These entities create themselves in the similar way how humans create servitor tulpas. They are very annoying to deal with in every way. There are certainly entities that do that sort of thing. I'm not familiar with the name or the books that you were talking about, but there are certainly some complex creatures out there that can be difficult to deal with. Um, what was I saying? So other ghost stories. My grandmother's house when I was a child was insanely haunted. It's probably part of the reason I don't have any like real fear of ghosts. I mean, honestly, also just the way I think, I fear of ghosts just doesn't make a lot of sense to me in the first place. So maybe it is just how I've always been, but that place was insanely haunted. And I know I just said I never had any fear of ghosts, but like, when all your cousins are acting afraid, you act afraid, you start acting afraid too. Um there was these ghosts that anytime us grandchildren spent the night at my grandmother's house, as soon as the last adult left the room, you would hear somebody doing dishes in the kitchen. And we'd all hide behind the couch. And because I'm the one that's the least afraid and the one that actually willing to do it, they'd all eventually make me go out from the couch and go over and see what was going on. And even when you got in the kitchen, you could hear it, but there was no ghost. Nothing. I mean, I suppose there was a ghost, but no person. There was nothing you could see. No dishes ever actually got done. But every single time, my whole childhood, there was my uncle had made up a story. Speaking of belief imparts reality, had made up one of my uncles had made up a story telling us all that there was a man buried in the walls of the house. But he had gotten so convinced, or he told us that story so many times that when the house finally got torn down many, many years later, after we'd all moved, after they'd all moved out, obviously. But yeah, he was told that story so many times that when they tore the house down and there wasn't a man in the walls, he was surprised, which is rather funny. See, ghost stories I can tell. Um, my dog actually had an interesting bit because my own house was haunted. The one in Clearfield there that I mentioned a few times. Um, it's all kinds of stuff that happened there. Like my grandma's house, like I said, it was very, very haunted. There was a ghost that shoved my grandma one time there, so that was kind of concerning. My grandpa, whoever, who lived in the midst of all that in that house, claimed to not believe in ghosts. Anyways, um, like I said, my parents' house was the one in Clearfield that was very haunted as well. There was a boy there that really liked to flirt with girls of a certain age. Like if they were the same age as him, like 13, 14, he'd always just tease them and flirt with them and be all over the place. Is it kind of funny? Because like the girls in the family, like they start getting to that age, like oh, he's gonna start bugging you now, and then you get that age, and he'd start flirting with them. That's the way most of us saw it, anyways, just flirting. But yeah, he was like 13. It's just a ghost, and most of the girls did see him at least a couple times when they got around 13, 14 years old. Let's see, what else? That's a funny thing is there's so many different stuff that's happened to me. I don't even know what to I said we could talk a bit about self-defense. So we'll get on to that. Um like I harp on this so much, but the biggest thing that I recommend is having a personal sigil. This is a focus for your will, and that's what a weapon should be, is an extension of the self. I talk about that with physical weapons, the sword is not the weapon, you are the weapon. The sword is only a tool, stuff like that. And the sword becoming part of your arm, or the gun becoming one with the gun that you are firing, an extension of your eyes and your fingers. They're all supposed to make them all connected. That's what this is. This is the connection to you. This is a definition of your will. Obviously, yours is going to look different than mine, but that's why one of the reasons another reason that I strongly recommend creating a personal sigil, because you can wield it as a weapon in any sort of spiritual defense. Mine happens to actually look like a mace, kind of, so I can just like actually use it as a weapon, but just projecting that image forward, pushing your presence, your will forward, and you can shape it into any form you want once it's been drawn into you. Draw out your personal sigil, imagine it, and push forward, and you can basically just cast magic missile. If you want to look at it in D&D terms, and push your will out there. That's why you see mine in the background in many places, of all kinds of places, because it's a protection spell. Everybody's personal sigil is a protection spell. I mean, everybody that has one. Okay, so beyond that, and there's lots of things that you can do for personal protection. Now, each one of these that I'm talking about can be used. I'm going to talk about in the next little bit. Can be used with or without a personal sigil. Even the creating of a weapon, you can literally just visualize a weapon when you are dealing with an astral being, a ghost, or anything like that, and use that visualization as a means of defending yourself and or harming the creature that is, or entity that is trying to like harm you. And when you were doing this, whether you're starting with you're using your personal sigil and then forming it into the thing, or simply visualizing the sword or the blade or whatever, one of the things that you really want to remember is what the edge of a blade feels like, what the actual cutting surface feels like. If you've been cut, if we've all been cut at some point, and can remember that sensation, that is the thing we're really looking for, is what that cut feels like. Deep sensation, the actual experience of it is the thing that you want to project out when you're trying to cut. The same as if you're making a whip of thorns. If you've ever been torn by thorns, you want to use things that you have a deep experience with, because those actually resonate. Those you actually feel, and you can push that feeling out as a weapon. Yeah, when we're dealing with astral or etherical beings, and then we can take this further to protection. Because right now we're talking about offense. I tend to visualize electricity or fire as well as bright plasma or even light. A lot of it's meant to transmute or confuse them as well as disable them from attacking any further. Indeed, this all of these things are sensations that they might have a way to deal with, or they might confuse them or actually harm them. Like I said earlier about threatening to rip the elemental to pieces, even though I wasn't even sure that I could. It's discombobulation, it's confusion. It When these things are applied to you, the best way to deal with it, if you can't find a way out of it when it actually happens, is to allow the pattern in and then change it and transmute it within you back to your cohesive form. Yeah. To rebalance yourself within it. And I forget what exactly my point was there. I got a little lost. Anyways, it's the first intermission I've taken tonight. I need to go do an intermission real quick. Be right back. Okay, I'm back. So, as I was saying, um, it's the experience, the remembrance of a moment of pain that you're pushing out when you are creating an astral weapon. That is the most important aspect of it. If you're using a sword, you can still remember use the remembrance of getting cut by a razor as the cutting edge of the sword, though, because there are other aspects of a sword that you might want to have in that. You can combine the experiences. Like what it feels like to swing something heavy and hard along with that same bit, whatever you've have experiences for. Have I ever heard of mirroring or inverting? Um, in what context? You say about with patterns, but you mean with the spirit, like inverting the patterns within their form? Because yes, you can do that. That is another way of going about it. And yeah, we can get to that possibly. It's not really relevant to spirit, but kind of fits. I charge a playing card deck of Friday the 13th and think the deck magic pick up on Jason's vibes. I mean, whatever works, whatever gets you that image, that feeling. Um, a lot of times what I'm pushing out, besides the image of cutting, is I'm still just going with that my will, my presence, my actual me is the weapon. That is what I'm pushing forward into the other being. I'm just pushing me. Because like the blade and these things, they work. But if you're really getting that will to, well, frankly, if you're able to actually create that will to do harm to the other being within yourself, that is extremely potent. Because then when you get in there, then you can feel the pattern, the threads of exactly how they're woven, and then invert that pattern. Yeah, you're essentially unweaving the being. Now, one thing we do need to understand, and frankly, in some ways caught me by surprise, is once something perceives, it never leaves. So there's no actual completely getting rid of anything. You can move things, like when you're getting rid of a haunting, you can move something. You can even push its perception out of this reality so that you are probably never gonna, or anyone you'll ever meet will ever deal with it again, but it's gonna be somewhere. And like I feel like there's a lot of word salad in there of just, you know, looking at their patterning and then doing the opposite pattern. But you feel a weave. You will feel when you push yourself into something as a weapon, you will feel the, I don't know, that's kind of hard to explain. The words aren't there. It the words just aren't there. But you also, if you're gonna do it that way, let's just stick with the visualizing the cutting for now, because the other one you've really that's it's an advanced and very destructive technique, but it also has inherent vulnerabilities in it because you're putting yourself right in there. Understanding what the poison is, most astral poisons are inverted forms of emotional elemental energy. For instance, inverted fire energy can cause a painful burning sensation by transmuting energy directly into the non inverted counterpart. It can be transmuted more easily into another element. Um, yeah. I mean, you do feel like if it's a sensation of elements, yeah, if you feel heat, you can apply cold to it, the reverse element, or simply allow it to pass through you. Like if I've most of the time, if I'm gonna get like I was saying before about the cutting blade, if you feel them pushing into you, or even if they're pushing into you with your personality, the best thing to do is just to absorb and momentum outwards. And then you can actually turn that back in upon themselves and essentially create an inward pattern and potentially push them into a smaller and smaller area. Like combat on that level is it's all about visualizations. It's all about being able to perceive them well enough to react in a way that their perception is not going to know how to respond to. Something that is going to make them falter in their cohesion. And the way to defend is to simply have some core that always maintains. Again, why I harp on constantly using personal sigils. I like the stout better, but this cider is much more like drinkable. I've almost gone through it, but it's also, how alcohol is. Once you've gotten to a certain level, it's much easier to drink, at least for me. And that's part of the reason I have to keep an eye on how much I drink. Y'all might start to think might be thinking that I drink on a fairly regular basis with how much you see me on these lives with the alcohol, but they're they're to keep me loose for the live, essentially. But I do come from a background where I have to keep an eye on these things. How much alcohol I consume. Oh, absolutely. I mean, the runes have a lot of momentum, and that there's a lot of us that believe certain things about them, and they even have a inherent suggestiveness to the form that they're given. Like Tyr, which I mentioned earlier, is victory, success, war, and it looks like an arrow pointing upwards, you know? And strength is built, it's like a line up and then slanted and then down. It's built in a very strong position. It is something that was hard to break. Disruption, you got Halgies, you have two lines with a line in the middle. It's like something being knocked out of the center and pushed away. But if you put a different intent to it when you're drawing it down, that is definitely going to make it behave oddly because now you're combining things. Like if you draw Halgies with the intent of creating balance, you're not going to get disruption or balance. You're going to get something else. You're going to get a hybrid effect. So it will most definitely behave differently. I've never really thought about doing that, honestly. It's an interesting idea that could be experimented with. But that brings me back to the idea of weaponry. If for some reason the stuff I was talking about being able to imagine a blade or a blunt object, how it feels to be striking, and using that, projecting that out, if you have too much trauma around that, or it's hard for you to visualize for some other reason, Another thing you can do is literally just throw tear at them because it is a rune of it's a violent rune. uh, Quite frankly, that's the best way to say it. It is the rune of war, the rune of Tyr, the god of war. This is the guy that that handed down the knowledge of how berserkers function. And someday we'll probably talk more about frenzy gnosis, the whole berserker thing. But no, Thuraz or Tyr does not play. That is the rune. That's the rune of the god Tyr. I guess you my stuttering just kicked in. Sorry there. I guess you prefer the word Thuriaz, but it's the same rune, I believe, just different. Like Elder Futhart versus whatever the other ones are called. Normally, I'd remember that, but I am on my second beer, and however many tokes I am in at this point. Okay, so Tiwaz. Yeah, that's the one that they call it besides Tiw. Oh, now you got me wondering. Hold on, I want to look at it. I want to. Oh, that one's third. Okay. Thuriaz, Odin's rune. Or what? I'm drunk. Clearly, I've gotten to that point. Yeah. Yep. I have a hard time remembering the names of all the different runes, to be honest. I know what they mean when I throw them. Yeah. Well, I'm not that drunk. I'm using it as an excuse that, well, honestly, I have a hard time remembering the names of the runes all the time. I know what they mean. I know what they mean when I throw them down in my casting. I know what they mean when I'm drawing them on the wall. The important part for me, but keeping straight what the Norse called them back in the day. That part will throw me off sometimes because it's not important in my day to day work with the runes. I would really go through this cider a lot faster than I did the first beer. Well, maybe not. I've been on for 2 hours almost. So, anyways, let's see. What other stories do I have? I feel like I've got to have a few more stories. Um, I have another story about the auditorium that has nothing to do with ghosts whatsoever. I think we'll leave that. It has nothing to do with the theme of the channel. It's just a story of me hitting my friends with sticks. Yeah, we broke into the auditorium a lot when I was in high school. And one time we broke into the auditorium. We were in there messing around. We started messing with the stage weights, like the weights to bring the curtain up and down. And we'd pull all the weights off or something, and we did something dumb. And the weight shot up, and like the one part shot up into the ceiling, and the thing fell down. And as it's shooting up, we run out the one door, and then we run down the hall, and it hits the floor. Teachers come out to see what it is, and then we come up behind the teachers. What was that sound? And they actually let us go back in there to help them look around to see what had happened. And we were really just seeing the side effects of what we had done, or not side effects. What the results of what we had done. It wasn't that bad, and we didn't get blamed because we were the people that were there when it was found. I was kind of rotten in high school, I guess, just a little bit. Um, Adventures in Autism in the 8th grade, I decided I wanted to try and be like everybody else. So I got like I wanted to fit in, right? So I got the MC Hammer pants, and then I got the shoes with the flashing lights in them, which were ironically, if any of I'm dating myself immensely, but that was the first time those came out, and they were actually kind of like a gangbanger thing. So the pants and the shoes, I guess, kind of matched, but not really, like different types of rap fan type stuff. But then I had the Terminator Kids haircut and the gecko color changing shirt for the preppies wore, and oh man, I did not succeed in fitting in. I just took every popular thing from all the different cliques and threw them on one kid. Nobody fell for it. They all knew I was weird still. How do you do a fellow kid energy clothing? I don't. I hit high school like at 10th grade, and all of a sudden everybody thought I was cool for the same reasons nobody liked me before that, which was that I had long hair and I came from like known stoner family and was visibly not Mormon. Being in Utah, suddenly it went from I was the outcast to everybody thought I was suddenly high school, and suddenly I'm cool, and I'm like, what? Who? What? No. Why do you want? I'm not going to be your friend. You've been a dick to me my whole life. Why am I suddenly going to be nice? Why am I suddenly going to accept you being nice to me? Fuck you. That was kind of my response to most of it. So I mean, I could have been really popular in high school, and there were certainly people that liked me, but I wasn't popular. I didn't have a lot of friends because I didn't want to. I didn't want to suddenly be friends with these jerks just because suddenly they thought I was cool for having long hair and smoking pot and etc. When they hated me for the same reason a year before that. Fuck you. I mean, those weren't the only reasons. I was definitely autistic. I was dorky as all hell, but I also, that was my family background, and I had the long hair, family reputation, whatever. And people do sometimes use rooms on people. The cider's good, but it's a little too easy to drink, I think. Um, all right, we're not quite done yet, but I do have to go do another intermission. Back in a moment. Okay, I'm back. Yeah, people can do some pretty effective things with the runes. Some people can, for sure. And when you reverse the runes, they have yes, when you reverse the rune, it has a different effect. It can be a very subtle thing though when you were reading the runes. If you're one who casts the runes like they were done originally, rather than pulling them out one at a time and placing them. If you're pulling them one at a time, pulling them out one at a time and placing them upside down or reverse and upside right, whatever, have very significant differences. But if you're throwing them, you get a lot of them that are sideways and some of them that, like, you have to simply learn to understand what is and what isn't upside down. I always wonder on a with runes and dice having a spell of chances around you that mess those up. That is definitely a thing that can happen. Especially, you will find this especially when you are trying to read on people in particular. Like, somebody could maybe cast a spell on you to mess up your divination in some way like that. But when you are trying to read somebody, if you're trying to do divination on an individual who has spells on them to prevent such things, that's what you're going to wind up with. And that's one of the ways you will know that something is wrong with the divination and that they are blocking you is that when you then try to read on them, it's just going to come back gibberish. And that's the thing with something like that as well. Once you've gotten to the point that your runes, when you are casting them to read, you're going to know when the sentence doesn't make any sense, when it's gibberish. So if such a thing were to happen, I think you would see it pretty quickly because, well, especially if you're someone who has tried to cast on people who have blocks against such things often enough that you recognize when the runes are just going blah, 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 blah. You know, tarot cards, that's one of the actually disadvantages to tarot cards when you're trying to read on someone who is an opponent in some way, someone who is antagonistic to you or your aims, is that it's a little hard. It's a little harder to tell, at least for me, when the tarot cards aren't actually making sense because each card is a full sentence. While when you were casting runes, a lot of times each rune is a word in a sentence. It's easier to not notice word salad when each sentence is coherent. Or with a tarot card, because they're saying so much in each card. Where with the runes, it's often a little bit less in each one. Fehu rune can be used to gather energy around you and on the chakras and the part of attacking. I mostly just try to reflect with added bonus of basically reprogramming it that their attack turns into sticky goo and then Oh, into sticky goo that absorbs their own attacks. Yes, allowing that energy to come in and just be absorbed. And then, like I said, personally, rather than just sticky goo, I like to bring it back around and use that momentum as a way to wrap something around them. And then, often, once they are struggling against that, drop the floor, make the area that they've been standing on dissipate as they're dealing with the squeezing in, and then they often that's one of the moments that causes loss of equilibrium and confusion. Because, like I said, when you're dealing with astral combat, all you're really trying to do is throw them off. All you're really trying to do is make them think that they have been beaten. The astral is about intent, perception, and that belief in the line between belief imparts reality and belief creates reality can really get blurry. And you just have to come up with the right counter symbol to make the person feel they have been defeated. You know, there's more to it than that. To be honest, that's a surface level understanding. There's more to it than that. But 9 times out of 10, even when dealing with astral beings like Ronaldo, it was simple enough that when I made that threat about tearing him apart and I managed to make myself look like I was in several places in the trailer park at the same time, it was enough to make him just get in the gourd and stay there instead of burning it that time. It's about convincing your opponent that they have been defeated. It's not about stronger willpower. It's not about more mana. It's not about anything but that. But anyways, I was going to get off of defense and or off of offense and onto defense for the last bit of this here. It's been 2 hours. I actually am out of drink at this point, so I'm probably not gonna be on too much longer. My roommate, the one that does the cooking, did these fried pork ribs. I had enough before I got on the live to know they're awesome, and I'm actually getting pretty impatient to have a few more. Anyways, so we're gonna get on to defense. All these things that I said apply to defense as well, except for you're creating it in a large sphere. You're creating space, and on the edge of that space is where you put those um remembrances of pain, what it felt like to be cut, what it felt like to be torn by thorns, what it cut like, any of that stuff on the edge, bristling out. And then on the inside, we don't leave this empty space. We leave this as an area controlled by our presence. And once again, this is why I am a strong proponent of the astral sigil, because that's pretty much automatic. If you've started this with, you pull up your sigil and then turn it into those things, as it spreads out, the intervening space becomes your space, becomes filled with your presence. And then if they break through that, you become aware more immediately, and it isn't just vacuum. It isn't just empty space they can travel through. It is immediately responding to it being in contact with your will, and you can just make more thorns. Or if they manage to get through that, find a visualization akin to that is a good response to whatever you are seeing is that visualization coming in. And if it's something that for some reason you can't push the flow of it, allow it to go through. Make empty space before it until it passes through, and then redirect it back into itself, creating a downward spiral, but making it go into itself tighter and tighter. Yeah. That's how all of this works as far as combat on that level. Having the actual willingness and desire to cause harm is vital. And I know that's a weird thing to say until you really think about it. But even then, like I said, no matter how much damage you do to something, it's gonna go somewhere. Once you perceive, you can never leave. And if we're using the S1 sigil, we can actually push that being into the S1 sigil when we have a control over where it's going, or we can even push out an image of the S1 sigil to something and hit it with that image and possibly knock it into another reality. Or once you have control of it, you can push it into the S1 sigil and direct it just into the S1 sigil. Because from there, it goes to a place where where no harm can be done, and perhaps it'll get its way there. But you want to push it into the sigil and then past. Honestly, just never mind about all that. Push it to the sigil and past into somewhere where it cannot return, and there you go. You don't have to deal with it ever again. But trouble with that one is that somebody does. So maybe that's not the best advice. That's just throwing it into someone else's dimension. Worked a few times, but they keep going to the same one. I'm not sure that was the best advice. Oh yeah, that's empty. So, anyways, let's see. I feel like I should end this with at least one more story. Trying to think of a good one. And a lot of different things happened to me over the last 47 years. For some reason, I'm having a hard time thinking of a good one. Okay, this one isn't all that interesting, but I mean, it's interesting, but there's no real like lesson to this one, other than that some things are just a memory. Yeah, like spaces themselves create a record of what has gone on. There are moments that are so repeated so many times and have so much emotion and things in them that the place itself remembers and will sometimes think about that memory and essentially remember that moment, even though there's nothing going on at that time. Now, I mentioned my grandma's house before. My grandma's house was actually one of three parts of a larger house that was moved. It used to be a grand mansion. And there was one room in particular, a room I lived in for a while, because I stayed with my grandma for a while when I was a teenager. Things weren't going well with me and my dad. Anyways, this room and everyone that's ever stayed in that room has had this same experience. You would go into that room, anyways, you go into that room, and every once in a while you'd hear organ music, but it sounded like it's coming from a distance. And there was a field, and a little ways down the field, there was this blue warehouse. And that's where it kind of sounded like the music was coming from. But as soon as you walked out of that room, the music would stop. Walk back into the room, the music would start again, but far away, like from the warehouse. And so if you walked out of the room, down the hallway, out the into the main room, out of the main room to the front door, walked out the front door. So you're standing in front of the window of the room that you were in and looking to the warehouse. No music. Never. Not once. But if you hurried back all the way into the main room, cross into the hallway, down the hallway, into the door of the room, and as soon as you cross the threshold of the door, there'd be that music from far away, as if it was coming from that warehouse. And I think perhaps that was originally the organ room where the music was in, or maybe it was a room where somebody would listen to the organ being played in another part of the house. And them listening to the organ is what caused the memory, but far away. I don't know exactly what was going on there, but there wasn't a ghost playing an organ at the warehouse. There was nothing going on at the warehouse. There was a memory of an organ being played at a distance that had been so ingrained into that room that the room itself would remember. And when it did, anyone who was in the room could hear it. Because it's not like there'd be one person in the room that could hear it and one person that couldn't. My grandpa had heard it on many occasions. Although, like I said earlier, he lived in that house most of my childhood. Came out of it claiming he didn't believe in ghosts. But I think some people just like to deny things because he'd had some experiences. I know he'd heard the organ music. We talked about it before. Anyways, um, like I said, dinner is really calling my name. It sounds very good at this point. Um, and I do technically have more stories, but I can't think of any that are just sound like fun to tell in this moment. So yeah, and see, I can't tell either one of those. Those are like my walkabout stories. I can't really tell in a public live. But there's some interesting things happen with those. Anyways, yeah. Open up the floor to comments, questions, or concerns at this time. The spirit world and the physical world do share characteristics. As above, so below, as they say. But there are different rules. Intent is much more powerful there because we're closer to the original point of manifestation, which is from the mental plane. The guiding needle of the mental plane sews the thread of the astral plane and creates the weave of the material. If that made any sense. We go from conception, the movement of thought on the material plane, which condenses down into energy. Because what is energy but the process of information and transfer? Energy condenses down into matter, and we have the material plane. And this is also how a moment manifests. And can you say it again? Which part? I know I'm probably not being entirely clear at this point. As far as I know, multiple people saw the particle death of spirits. Also, yeah, you make some sense how spirits reproduce seem similar to mitosis or something like that, even though they aren't cells. The bit with the needle. Ah, okay. So the needle, the guiding needle of the mental plane, sows the hold on. Let me try again. The guiding needle of the mental plane sets the motion of the thread as it sews through the fabric of the weave of the astral plane and creates the fabric of the moment of the material plane. This is also how a moment manifests from conception on the mental plane to in which rise to intent on the astral plane and the manifestation of the mechanical realities of a moment as it manifests on the material plane. And I put way too much thought into making that sound poetic, and I think it came out as a little too confusing. So let me try that one more time. The mental plane guides the needle as it sews a thread through the astral plane, weaving the fabric of the matter of the material plane as it manifests into a moment. Yeah, I think that'll do. Spirits can be created in many different ways. I mean, spirits do essentially become created, but like if something when life begins in a particular dimension, how it begins is with the moment a decision must be made, and that's where the first new perception arises. And but it's the same with spirits, like the spirit of that river that I talked about earlier, the river elemental, or really creek elemental, um, was created in a moment where the probabilities of possible happenings were even. And essentially, nothing could happen unless a choice was made. And so a choice was forced into being. And that moment where a choice was forced into being created a perception, created an awareness, which then manifested into the elemental that existed within that creek. And then that was that its will was then altered by man artificially moving the bank of the creek and making it go where they wanted to go and changing the flow, and that created a disturbance within its pattern that when the lady on the Hoarders episode had a traumatic brain injury and her mind was left open, that errant part of the flow was exposed to that crack within her psyche and began to flow within that trauma. And that's how Ronaldo began his pain, his trauma, began understanding and experiencing the fact that his creek had been moved, that his flow had been altered, and he now needed to create a different flow, a flow of blood rather than water. And this was the poison from which he had to be rehabilitated. So if a room can remember, does that make that consciousness eternal since it has perceived? Hmm. Huh. I like this question. I like this question a lot. I certainly don't have a ready answer for that. Because there's certainly an argument to be made that in order for a room to have a memory, it must have perception of some kind. I have definitely been in houses that exist. Let me rephrase that because that certainly sounds. I have been in houses that have their own existence, that have their own self awareness, isn't quite the right word. I mean, even the home that we live in broaches on that. And we could make that stronger. No, actually, you have been working on that to quite some degree. But, anyways, um, if enough of that memory is created, yes, I want to say yes. But again, I don't have a quick, ready answer for that. That's a fascinating question that I'm going to be thinking on for a while. Maybe we'll talk about it again later. Anyways, um, I am really wanting to get to that food that I was mentioning. I think that we're gonna go ahead and call it a night. It's been a great time. I've enjoyed having you all here tonight. We've had a lot of interesting things brought up. Some interesting things happen in the chat as well. So I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you all for sticking with me to the end. Um, yeah, bright blessings and an interesting fate. This has been Sorcerer Tal. We'll see you next time.